Imagine this. You walk into a crowded room, everyone's smiling, glasses clink, small talk flows, and laughter circles like perfume. It's a typical night of networking, celebration, or some polite ritual of connection. You're charming, you nod, say the right things, mirror expressions, pretend to care. People like you. You're one of them, sociable, friendly, approachable. But then something strange happens. You leave the party, and there's a hollow sound in your chest. Your mind, once sharp, probing, critical, is now cluttered with noise. Things you wanted to think deeply about earlier feel distant. The book you were excited to read now bores you. The questions that once kept you up at night, who am I, what do I really want, feel embarrassing. So you scroll. You text. You check who liked your recent post. You replay conversations in your head, calculating if you made the right impression. You've been rewarded for fitting in, and punished for thinking too much. Now pause. Have you ever noticed that the more time you spend around people, the less time you spend with yourself? That the more agreeable you become, the less honest you feel, that in trying to be loved by everyone, you begin to forget who you actually are. It's subtle, it doesn't feel like stupidity, but something inside you dulls, like a blade rusting from disuse. Your thoughts become softer, less threatening. You begin to edit your own mind before others can judge it. You say what's expected, not what's real. You nod when you should question. You smile when you should walk away. And worst of all, you feel proud of it. This is not a rant against socializing. It's something deeper. It's a question that should terrify you if you take it seriously. What if being too social slowly robs you of your intelligence, your inner clarity, your mental independence, your ability to truly see? What if the constant need to be liked, accepted and understood by others turns you into something quieter inside, safer, softer, stupider? And what if that's exactly what society wants? Machiavelli warned of this centuries ago, not in those exact words, but in principle. He spoke of the masses as something to be managed, of popularity as a liability, of independent thought as dangerous, not to others, dangerous to you, if you truly seek power, sovereignty or truth. See, to be intelligent, is to be alienated. To think clearly is to threaten comfort. To pursue truth, is to risk offense. And no matter how progressive or open-minded your circle claims to be, deep down, most people don't want truth. They want agreement. They want validation. They want someone who doesn't make them uncomfortable. So you become that person, not out of malice, but out of exhaustion. You learn to suppress your sharper thoughts to preserve harmony. You trade insight for belonging. You stop saying the thing that would change the conversation, because you know it would change how people look at you. And you need them to like you, because you've been conditioned to think that being alone means you're broken, that being misunderstood means you're wrong, that being rejected means you failed. But what if that's the lie? What if true intelligence demands solitude? What if wisdom grows in silence, and dies in crowds? What if the smart people society promotes are just clever social performers, not deep thinkers? And what if being truly awake, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, is something that makes you less sociable by design? Because once you really see people, it becomes harder to pretend. Once you understand the games, it becomes harder to play. Once you hear the echo of your own mind clearly, the noise outside starts to feel unbearable. You begin to speak less. You begin to observe more. You begin to ask questions that make others uncomfortable, not out of cruelty, but because comfort has become your enemy. But here's the real paradox. The moment you begin to think deeply, you lose your place in the crowd. And the moment you regain your place in the crowd, you stop thinking deeply. You can either be understood, or be intelligent. Rarely both. So ask yourself, when was the last time you said something real in a room full of people? When was the last time you kept quiet, not out of wisdom, but out of fear? And when was the last time you betrayed your own thoughts, just to keep the peace? Because if it happens too often, you're not being sociable, you're being trained. Trained to nod, trained to laugh, trained to play dumb, trained to stay small. And like all training, it gets easier with time. Until one day, you wake up and realize you haven't had an original thought in years. You've become who they wanted you to be, but not who you were meant to become. And that's where we begin. You weren't born this way. You didn't come into the world seeking approval, censoring your words, or biting your tongue in fear of not being liked. You were wild, curious, disruptive. You asked too many questions. You wanted to understand everything. And when you didn't like something, you said so, without checking the room first. But slowly, over time, society began to carve away your sharp edges, not with violence. With smiles. Don't say that. That's rude. Don't be so intense. Can't you just be normal? And so you learn to flinch every time your mind reached too far. This is not just a personal experience. It's a cultural disease. A quiet war on depth, and it's been growing for centuries. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask you wear in public to be socially acceptable. It's the version of you that knows how to behave, how to please, how to be just enough of yourself to get by. But Jung warned, if you become too attached to the mask, you forget there's a real face underneath. And worse, when you believe the mask is you, the unconscious begins to rot. You suppress not just your shadow, the darker impulses society finds inconvenient, but your insight, your intensity, your hunger for something deeper. We've built a world where it's easier to repeat than to reflect, where critical thinking is seen as negativity, and independent thought is seen as difficult. As a result, the collective IQ of society isn't necessarily dropping, but its cognitive courage is. People aren't thinking less because they can't. They're thinking less because they're afraid of what it would cost them. And what does it cost? Relationships, comfort, ease, belonging. It costs the illusion that you're okay. Because once you start thinking deeply, once you really wake up, you can't pretend anymore. You can't tolerate small talk. You can't laugh at shallow jokes. You can't sit in circles where nothing real is ever said. You start craving substance, and that craving becomes a curse. Because substance is rare, which means so are you. And being rare is a lonely thing. This is where most people retreat. Not because they're weak, but because the silence gets too loud. The solitude starts revealing truths they're not ready to see. And so they return to the crowd, where it's warm, familiar, and numb. But the cost doesn't just end at the individual. There's a societal consequence too. A culture that suppresses deep thought becomes easy to control. When people stop questioning, they become predictable. When they prioritize acceptance over accuracy, they stop resisting. And when intelligence becomes associated with being difficult, society begins to reward stupidity, disguised as charm. That's how democracies decay without violence. That's how empires fall smiling. Bread and circuses, likes and dopamine. And Machiavelli, ever the brutal realist, understood this perfectly. He knew that to rule the masses, you don't need to make them love lies. You just need to make truth feel lonely. You isolate the thinkers, reward the obedient, keep everyone social, busy and mildly distracted, then sit back and let the noise smother the mind. That's the final, unseen consequence of sociability as survival. The death of dissent, not through censorship, but through self-editing. A society doesn't need gulags, if it can get people to censor themselves out of fear of being too much. So here's the real question. How many of your thoughts are truly yours? How much of your personality is genuine, unpolished, raw, unsanitized? And how many times have you laughed, nodded, or agreed, just to keep the peace? Because every time you do, a piece of your mind goes to sleep. And the longer it sleeps, the harder it is to wake up. But here's the thing about intelligence. It never fully dies, it waits. In the background. In the silence. In the questions you still don't have answers for. And when you're finally ready to stop performing, ready to be alone with the truth, it will come back. Not gently, but with fire. Next we'll talk about that fire, the rebellion, the shift. How to break free, not by becoming antisocial, but by becoming sovereign. How to reclaim your voice, your mind, and your power in a world that trains you to betray all three. You don't need to disappear into the woods to escape the crowd, but you do need to stop worshipping it. The first rebellion isn't public. It's psychological. It happens the moment you stop looking outward for approval, and start asking yourself a terrifying question. What would I say, if no one was watching? The moment you ask that, and actually wait for an answer, you've already broken rank. Because society doesn't fear loud rebellion. It fears silent minds waking up. And make no mistake, waking up is violent, not externally, but internally. You'll begin to realize just how much of your life was built on borrowed thoughts, how many things you said just to be liked, how many values you claimed to have, but never lived. It's not comfortable, but it's real. And realness is the birthplace of intelligence. Here's the truth, you won't hear in school, therapy, or polite conversation. Most people aren't thinking. They're recycling. They absorb what the group says, what the trend dictates, what the algorithm feeds, and they repeat it. Not because it's true, but because it's safe, because it sounds intelligent, because it keeps them in the room. If you want to break free, you must risk sounding wrong, before you sound wise. This means saying things that make others pause. It means admitting when you don't know. It means asking questions that don't have easy answers. It means choosing truth over popularity. Every time. But how do you start? You start by doing the one thing modern culture teaches you to avoid: be alone, on purpose. Without distraction, no music, no podcasts, no scrolling, no stimulation, just you, and your thoughts. And the uncomfortable silence in between. Most people call that boredom, but boredom is just the mask your mind wears before it shows you who you really are. Stay long enough. And that mask falls, and what comes next? Clarity, not all at once, but in flashes, insights that feel like lightning striking your spine. Old memories reframed. Motivations exposed. Lies you've told yourself lit up like police interrogations. You begin to understand why you've been so exhausted. You've been carrying everyone else's voice in your head, and now you're learning to let them go. Solitude isn't withdrawal, it's detox. And like any detox, it hurts before it heals. You'll feel the urge to check your phone 100 times. You'll feel like you're missing out. You'll wonder if you're being antisocial or weird. You're not. You're becoming sovereign. You're not pushing people away. You're just refusing to be controlled by their expectations. But let's be clear. This path isn't about arrogance or superiority. It's not about believing you're too smart for others. That's just another mask. This is about refusing to betray yourself for a seat at a table where nothing real is ever served. It's about choosing depth over decoration, truth over tribalism, vision over validation. And once you commit to that, you'll start to notice something strange. You speak less, but when you do, people listen. You don't try to impress, but people notice anyway. You're not loud, but somehow, you're felt. Why? Because the world is starving for people who aren't performing. You become magnetic, not by pretending to be someone else, but by finally ruthlessly becoming yourself. And here's where history can help. Some of the sharpest minds, the true revolutionaries, were profoundly disconnected from the social norms of their time. Nietzsche wrote in solitude, burned bridges with the academic world, and died misunderstood. Emily Dickinson lived in near total isolation, and still wrote poetry that cracked open the human soul. Diogenes lived in a barrel and mocked kings. Kierkegaard walked the streets of Copenhagen alone, haunted by thoughts too heavy for small talk. Even Machiavelli, yes, the man behind the cold calculations of the prince, spent his exile reading philosophy in the woods, writing letters to dead Roman emperors like they were old friends. Were they antisocial, or were they simply unwilling to dilute their minds for comfort? Real thinkers don't reject connection, they just reject corruption, the slow erosion of clarity that comes from needing to be liked too often by too many people. That's the shift you need to make. You don't need to hate people, but you do need to stop depending on them for your sense of self. That means setting sacred time for thought, for reading, for long walks without earbuds, for writing without an audience, for ideas that no one claps for but you still chase anyway. That means practicing psychological honesty, saying what you really believe even when it makes things awkward. Not aggressively, just truthfully, calmly, unapologetically. It also means accepting that not everyone will like this version of you. Some people liked the you that mirrored them, the one who nodded politely, laughed on cue, played safe. They might not understand your withdrawal. They might take your clarity as distance, your quiet as arrogance. Let them. You're not responsible for their comfort. You're responsible for your mind. And once you start protecting it like a sacred space, once you stop letting noise pollute it, you'll realize something liberating. You don't need to be liked. You need to be clear. That's the new rebellion. Not rage. Not noise. Not canceling everything that doesn't agree with you, but the silent, unwavering cultivation of clarity in a world obsessed with confusion. And once you taste that clarity, even for a moment, it's impossible to go back. You'll start to feel it, in the way you speak slower, because you're thinking deeper, in the way you stop reacting, and start responding, in the way people begin to respect you, not because you demanded it, but because you now embody it. You've stopped being social for the sake of being liked. You've started being sovereign for the sake of being free. And that right there, is the revolution Machiavelli hinted at. But never said out loud. Not every war is fought with swords. Some are fought inside your own skull, and victory isn't loud, it's quiet. It's you, sitting alone, eyes clear, mind sharp, and for the first time in years, not needing anyone to clap. Next we arrive at the final truth, the deepest realization, the insight that changes not just how you think, but how you live. Imagine sitting at the edge of your own mind. It's vast, quiet, not a desert, not a storm, but a palace you forgot you built. It's filled with the echoes of questions you were once brave enough to ask, with truths you almost reached before you got distracted, with thoughts you silenced, so you could be loved. Now you're here again, and this time you don't flinch. You sit, you listen, and for the first time in years, you begin to hear your own voice, not the voice you used to talk to others, the voice you buried under layers of politeness, approval-seeking, and performative normalcy. It speaks slowly, but what it says cuts deeper than anything anyone's ever told you. You traded your kingdom for applause. That's the final truth. The one that stings. The one most people avoid until it's too late. That somewhere along the way you gave up your sovereignty. You let others vote on your identity. You outsourced your reality to the crowd. And the worst part, they didn't even ask for it. You offered it up, smiling, desperate to belong. The joke of the modern world is that it tells you to be yourself, as long as that self is marketable, likable, and not too inconvenient. You're sold individualism, but punished for authenticity. You're told you're free, but only as long as your freedom doesn't disrupt the hive, so you spend years playing a character. You don't even realize you're doing it. And if you're lucky, or maybe unlucky, something finally breaks. A friendship dissolves. Your job stops mattering, the applause stops coming, and for a terrifying moment, you're alone again. No noise, no masks, just you. And that's when the mind starts to whisper, good, now we can begin. You see, intelligence isn't just about how much you know, it's about how deeply you're willing to confront reality, especially when it hurts. And reality hurts when you've been living outside of it. But once you step into it fully, once you reclaim your inner territory, you begin to see that most people aren't living, they're echoing, acting, pleasing, surviving, and they're terrified of the one thing that could actually save them: depth. Because depth forces you to face everything you've hidden, every contradiction, every lie you told to fit in, every part of you that got small so others could feel big. But it also gives you something rare: self-respect. Not the kind built on achievements or compliments, the kind built on alignment, on knowing that you no longer betray your mind for social currency, that you no longer lie to stay warm, that you no longer choose being liked over being true. That kind of respect can't be bought. It can't be taught. It's forged in the crucible of solitude, in the quiet moments where you stop performing and start becoming. And what do you become? You become dangerous. Not because you're cruel, but because you see clearly. And in a society built on illusions, clear sight is a threat. People won't always like it. They'll call you cold, arrogant, antisocial, difficult. But beneath their discomfort is something else. Envy. Because deep down, they remember a time they were almost free too. A time before the noise, before the filters, before they became just another echo. They feel your clarity like a mirror they weren't ready to look into. And it makes them nervous. But it also makes them curious. Because while most people crave comfort, a few crave truth. And the moment they see you live it unapologetically, they remember that they can too. That's the final paradox. By choosing to be alone in your mind, you give others permission to do the same. You become the lighthouse. Not because you yell, but because you glow. And those who are done pretending, they'll find you, one by one, quietly. Like exiles returning home. That's the revolution Machiavelli never wrote about, but lived. He knew that to rule yourself is the only form of power that lasts. Everything else, titles, approval, applause, is just wind. So here's the last question I'll ask you. Are you willing to reclaim your mind? Even if it means being misunderstood. Even if it means being alone. Even if it means letting go of the version of yourself that everyone liked, but you never respected. Because once you do, you'll stop chasing crowds. You'll stop negotiating with your conscience. You'll stop watering yourself down for people who were never thirsty for truth to begin with. And you'll start building something real, something quiet, something unshakable, not a persona, not a brand, but a mind. Sharp, sovereign, unapologetic, the kind of mind that cannot be manipulated, that cannot be gaslit, that cannot be bought, because it remembers who it is, and it refuses to forget again. You are not here to be liked, you are here to see, and seeing clearly in a world of blurred vision, is not a curse, it's a calling, one that begins the moment you stop asking for permission, and start living like the crowd never existed.